I put the cardboard box down next to the dining table. Lisa glanced over, her eyes pausing on the cactus. Then her lips quirked. "You kept that thing?" I thought it was dead. I didn't answer. I knew it wasn't the cactus that was dead. It was something in our marriage that had withered long ago, something neither of us had the courage to name. That evening, I went into the study, once my creative corner. But now, the room felt cold, stuffy, dusty, and lacked the warm yellow lamplight it used to have. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my laptop, planning to continue editing the old designs, as a way to reassure myself I still had work to do, even if it was just for myself. Lisa didn't come in. She just cracked the door open and called out, "Ethan, I think I'm going to stay at Mom's for a few days." I turned to look. Her face showed no clear emotion, like she was announcing a rescheduled meeting. I asked, my voice hoarse, "How long is a few days?" She was silent for a moment, then replied softly, "Probably a while." I nodded. I didn't know what else to say then. No words felt right. No words mattered anymore. The door closed very softly, but the sound echoed in my heart like metal hitting cold cement. 2 days later, Lisa moved out. She didn't say she'd be back. I didn't ask. I just watched from the balcony as her car disappeared down the street. It rained that day, a quiet, persistent rain like a sad song with no end. When I turned back into the house, everything was the same, yet no longer whole. The closet was nearly half empty. The left drawer of the vanity held only a few old items. The kitchen no longer had matching mugs. The silverware set was halved. Even the painting on the staircase wall, the one Lisa had chosen on our first trip together, was gone. I walked around the house, as if searching for something lost. But the more I walked, the more I realized what was missing wasn't objects. It was the feeling of belonging. That night, I pulled a suitcase down from the attic. I had no plan. I just knew I couldn't stay in the place I once called home, which was now just the shell of a dead dream. I found a small apartment about 10 miles from downtown, old, with ivory walls, peeling wood floors, and a leaky bathroom faucet. But it was quiet. And more importantly, it didn't remind me of anything. I brought very little with me. A suitcase of clothes, my laptop, a few technical books, a desk lamp. And Marvin, the small cactus, now placed on the windowsill overlooking a patch of wild grass. The first night in the new apartment, I lay on the makeshift sofa. No bed, no mattress. Just the distant sound of cars, the gentle whistle of wind through the window cracks, and the dim yellow streetlight casting long shadows on the wall. I opened my laptop. On the screen, the old design was still there. Opening each line of code, each note, I felt like I was seeing myself from 10 years ago, a younger Ethan, full of passion, who didn't yet know words like eliminated, obsolete, or unsuitable. I started typing again, not to finish it, but just to do something that made me feel like I was still alive. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know if anyone still needed me. But in that moment, in that old room, I knew one thing. I still had value, not because of a title, not because anyone acknowledged it, but because I had once created useful things, because I had never betrayed my work, and because I was still clear-headed enough to start over, even from scratch. Everything I called home had now left me. But maybe, in that wreckage, I could rebuild something. Maybe not big, not beautiful, but my own, and something no one could take away ever again. Life settled into a different rhythm after that. No noise, no meetings, no deadlines, no more rushing mornings, hastily tying shoes, gulping down coffee to clock in on time. But there was also no one waiting for me at home. No check-in texts, no familiar laughter echoing through the house. Each morning, I woke when the sunlight first filtered through the thin, gray curtains. My small apartment was on the 3rd floor, no elevator, but it had a balcony overlooking an empty lot overgrown with wild grass and a few purple wildflowers. I often sat there in the mornings, with coffee I brewed myself, weak and bitter, quietly watching the sun inch its way over the neighboring rooftops, feeling like I was watching time pass with my own eyes. I started looking for work online. Not corporate jobs, but small freelance projects. Rewriting code for a warehouse management app. Redesigning the interface for an internal admin system. At first, I took these small gigs just to pay rent and buy groceries. But gradually, I realized I was relearning how to listen, not to clients, but to myself. No more boss. No more project manager. Just me and my laptop. I was free to think my way, code at my own pace, fix mistakes without anyone breathing down my neck. And in that prolonged silence, I started reopening the old design, the silent project I'd left unfinished because no one at the company believed in it. It was a self-learning AI system capable of monitoring and analyzing abnormal behavior in production processes, aiming to detect errors before they happened. A simple idea, but it needed time to develop. Previously, the board had rejected it, citing high costs and low returns. But now, I wasn't limited by them anymore. I just needed to believe in myself. I worked almost all day, sometimes from morning until 2 or 3 the next morning. No one pushed me, but I felt I needed to keep going, not for the money, but for the feeling that I was creating something meaningful. Like replanting a garden after a storm. Each line of code was a seed. Each successful run was a newly sprouted leaf. At lunchtime, I'd go to the park near my place. There was a wooden bench under an old maple tree. I often sat there eating a sandwich, listening to music through old headphones, and watching people pass by. Sometimes an old man walking his dog. Sometimes a college kid cycling past, backpack dangling. No one knew who I was, and nobody cared. But strangely, I didn't feel lonely anymore. I started to appreciate the quiet moments. The soft whistle of wine through the window. The pitter-patter of rain on the eaves. The sound of my keyboard echoing in the simple rented room. Each sound reminded me that I was still here. Still breathing. Still writing. Still hoping. One day, I got an email from a small startup in another state. They'd stumbled upon a demo version of the AI system I'd tentatively posted on a tech forum. The manager, named Darren, sent a very short message. "We don't know who you are, but this made me read it 3 times. It's simple, but incredibly necessary. Can we talk more?" I didn't reply immediately. I reread that email all afternoon. Not out of suspicion, but because for the first time in months, someone actually saw the value in what I was doing. Not because I used to be a department head. Not because of my degree, but simply because of the idea I had nurtured during years when no one was paying attention. We started talking via Zoom. Darren and his team were small, only about 5 people, but incredibly enthusiastic. They wanted to buy my software outright. I told them I wasn't ready for that, but I would collaborate to refine it into a commercial version. And just like that, I had work. No office, no business cards, just late-night online meetings and hundreds of lines of code each day. But I felt alive again. No longer the discarded shadow of my former self, but someone creating something new in my own way. Around the same time, Lisa sent a text. Very brief. "Heard you're working on something new. Hope you're okay." I read it, then put the phone down. Didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I was in a place where old words no longer had the weight to pull me back. I still lived in that small apartment, still ate homemade sandwiches, still drank self-brewed coffee. But every morning, when I opened my eyes, I felt closer to the truth than ever before. That sometimes losing everything is the way to find the only thing you can't lose, yourself. No one knew what I had been through. No one witnessed the long nights alone debugging code, or the quiet mornings sitting by the window with a cold cup of coffee. But I knew, and I didn't need anyone else to validate that worth anymore. I'm still here, still going. And this time, it's because I choose to. Not to prove anything, but to exist meaningfully. It was an early autumn day. The sun had lost its harshness. The wind blew with a cool edge, and there was something in the air that calmed my spirit. I was sitting in the familiar little coffee shop on the corner, the place I usually visited on weekends to work and watch the world drift slowly by outside the window. My laptop was open on the table, the screen displaying the interface of the system I was finalizing with the startup team. Underneath the screen, my phone lay face down. I didn't want any notifications interrupting my train of thought. I had just successfully run the latest test build. This time, the system not only detected errors 20 seconds earlier than the old model, but also automatically proposed corrective actions before an operator could even intervene. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath, feeling tired but also a surge of quiet joy rising in my chest. After all these months, I could finally see the clear shape of something I was once told was impractical. My phone vibrated. I flipped it over, an unfamiliar number. The screen displayed 3 familiar words: Westwell Industries. My heart skipped a beat. Westwell, my old company, the place where I'd spent my youth. I didn't answer. Let it ring a few times, then silence. A minute later, another call, this time a different number, still the same area code. I hesitated, looking at the screen, then placed the phone face down again. That afternoon, I received a total of 6 calls. All from Westwell, from HR, from a desk number once saved as the tech department, and finally, from Jude Marshall himself. I watched his name flash on the screen. My mind flickered back to the last time we met in that conference room. The cold handshake, the half smile, and the words, "You're part of a past that no longer fits." It all came back, as clear as if it were yesterday. I didn't pick up. I got up, left the shop, and walked along the stone-paved path between rows of trees turning color. Yellow leaves drifted down gently, scattering across the sidewalk. The air smelled of damp earth and the first hints of seasonal change. Hands in my pockets, I walked slowly, my heart untroubled, just calm. That evening, I opened my laptop to check my inbox. 3 unread emails, all with urgent subject lines. System support request. Urgent, operational failure. And finally, need to meet immediately. Ethan, please respond. I read through them, line by line. They described a critical failure in the system Westwell had implemented after I left. Data corruption, quality control chain collapse, the entire system halted for manual inspection. A multi-million-dollar production line was paralyzed, and they couldn't trace the cause. I knew where the problem was. It was the flaw I had warned about in the early days of Jude's takeover, when they decided to replace the platform I built with a more flexible, more modern, but unstable software. They had skipped months of testing just to shorten the deployment time. And now, things were starting to fall apart. Part of me wanted to reply to the email, simply to say, "I told you so." But the other part remained silent, not out of bitterness, but because I knew the truth doesn't need to be shouted. It makes itself heard at the right time. The next morning, I received another text message. This time, not from the company. From Lisa, just a few short lines. "Heard there's trouble at Westwell. Are you okay? Anyway, I hope you're doing well." I read it over and over, then put the phone down. Something pricked at my chest. Not longing, not regret. Just a light touch on a memory that was once deep, now dissolving into dust. I didn't reply. I went out onto the balcony, where Marvin the cactus was still alive after all these months. It had grown a bit, with a few new offshoots. I looked at it and suddenly smiled. Turns out, some things keep growing even when no one is watching. That afternoon, I had a meeting with Darren and his team. They had just secured significant funding from a tech venture fund and wanted me to officially lead the core research team to develop the product into a commercial platform. I agreed without hesitation, not because of the money, but because I believed in the people who had believed in me from the start. Before the meeting ended, Darren said something that made me think for a long time. "Ethan, I don't know why they let you go, but I know that's the reason we have what we have today." That night, I sat alone again at my computer. Looking at the lines of code running on the screen, I remembered the early days when I wrote the first lines. In a dark room, in complete silence, when the whole world had turned its back, I had sat with myself. And now, as the world started turning back, I no longer needed to chase after it. I didn't answer the phone. I didn't reply to the emails. I sent no messages. Not because I was cold, but because sometimes the clearest answer is silence. That silence wasn't avoidance. It was the powerful voice of someone who finally knew who he was and where he belonged. I closed the laptop, walked to the window, pulled the curtains slightly aside. The streetlight cast a warm yellow glow into the room. The wind blew softly through my hair, carrying the familiar scent of autumn. I knew the journey was just beginning. I returned to the old neighborhood late one afternoon, when the sun had already dropped behind the gray-tiled roofs and the light was just enough to illuminate the cracks in the walls of once familiar memories. A light wind rustled through the bare branches of the plane trees, sending a few dry leaves skittering across the pavement. I parked at the end of the street, under the shadow of a streetlight not yet lit. No one knew I was here. No one was waiting. I hadn't planned on announcing it. The old house looked the same. White painted door, the hanging planters on the second-floor balcony now holding only dried vines. I didn't intend to knock. I just stood across the street, leaning lightly against my car, looking at it like an outsider who had once wandered into his own life. I hadn't set foot in that house in over half a year. Hadn't even driven past until today. Not because I was afraid. Not because I was angry. But because I knew, sometimes, what hurts most isn't the bad memories, but the things that were once beautiful, now no longer intact. My phone vibrated. A notification from the bank. The first payment for the AI system license transfer had hit my account. I looked at the number, saw it was more than I had ever dreamed of. But strangely, what made me smile wasn't the money. It was the fact that I had gotten here on my own, without anyone pulling me up, without needing anyone's boost, and no longer needing validation from anyone. A woman pushed open the door of the house opposite, the neighbor who used to bring Lisa baked goods on holidays. She saw me, hesitated for a second, then gave a small smile and a nod. I nodded back. No words were exchanged, but just that was enough to make my heart feel a little less cold. I turned, about to head back to the car, when I heard a door open behind me. The hinges still creaked the same way they did when I lived there. I didn't turn around, just heard slow footsteps come out onto the porch. A voice called out, not loud, not soft, just clear enough for me to hear. Ethan. I stood still, silent for a few seconds, then turned. Lisa was standing on the top step, wearing the old beige knit cardigan I'd bought her the first winter we lived together. Her hair was down, her face free of makeup, and her eyes, they no longer held the icy gaze of those final months. Instead, there was a quiet, undisguised sadness. "What are you doing back here?" she asked, not accusingly, just as if needing a reason to understand. I looked at her for a moment, then shook my head slightly. "I'm not coming in. I just wanted to stand here for a bit." Lisa looked down at her feet, silent. The air between us was no longer tense, but a quiet space soaked in time. I could clearly see unspoken things in her eyes. Maybe regret, maybe remorse, or maybe just the realization that some things, once lost, can't be reclaimed with an apology. "I heard about what you're doing," she said, her voice trailing off. "They said the old company wanted to buy your software." I gave a faint smile. I turned them down. Lisa looked up at me. She didn't ask why, wasn't surprised, just let out a very soft breath, as if she already knew the answer before asking. I took a step towards her, but didn't get close. There was still a distance between us, not just a few feet of sidewalk, but everything that had happened in the preceding months. I said, "I'm not angry with you. Never hated you. It's just, I learned to love myself enough not to return to a place where I was devalued." Lisa pressed her lips together. She didn't cry, but her eyes glistened with a sadness so deep I couldn't look for long. She nodded slowly, then turned and went back inside. The door closed, this time not in anger, but with acceptance, as light as the last leaf falling from a barren branch. I got back in the car, started the engine. The sound echoed in the twilight, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the wind whistling through the narrow alleys. I drove slowly out of the neighborhood, without looking back. Ahead lay the road back to the small apartment where I'd started over. But this time, I carried something I didn't have before: peace. I wasn't seeking revenge on anyone, not demanding anything back, didn't need anyone's regret or apology. Because some doors don't open with hatred. They only open when you're calm enough to walk through, without needing to look back. And I had walked through. One Saturday afternoon, the air still. Pale sunlight cast a hazy yellow glow everywhere, filtering through the glass window of the small corner coffee shop I often frequented for work. But this time I wasn't there. That day, I chose to work from home, sitting at my desk by the window, typing code, listening to the sparrows chirping outside on the balcony. But in that coffee shop, in a quiet corner near the window, a woman sat alone. She wore a white blouse, a light gray cardigan thrown over it. Her hair was tied back neatly. Her face wore very light makeup, enough to maintain a refined look, but not enough to hide the faint shadows under her eyes. She ordered a black iced coffee, no sugar, then sat silently for a long time, idly stirring the small spoon, her gaze fixed on the street outside. Lisa. No one recognized her. No glances lingered. She was just part of the space, a woman sitting quietly on a slow weekend afternoon. But if you looked closely, you might see a sense of waiting in her eyes. Vague, not directed at anyone, but present nonetheless. On the table lay her phone, face up. The screen lit up, displaying an article just published on a major tech website. The headline stood out: "Quietly developed AI system by once-fired engineer is changing manufacturing." Just below it was my picture, a headshot cropped from a tech conference the previous week, where I was a guest speaker. Lisa read the article again and again. It wasn't clear if it was the content or the name of the person mentioned, Someone who used to sit across from her every evening in the house that was now cold. The bell above the shop door chimed as a new customer entered, a gust of wind blowing in, lifting the edge of the tablecloth slightly. Lisa didn't turn. She kept looking outside. Only her hands tightened slightly around the now-cold coffee cup. Time passed slowly, as if someone were trying to hold on to each moment. Outside, a young couple walked hand in hand, laughing softly, their shoes tapping lightly on the stone pavement. Lisa watched them, her eyes filled with sadness, but not envy. Just a fleeting touch on some distant memory, perhaps once very warm, and now just faintly cold. The phone lit up again. This time, a new email notification. Lisa picked it up, scanned it quickly. Then she put it down, this time flipping its screen down. A moment later, she opened her handbag, took out a small black box. Opening the lid, inside lay a silver wedding band. Simple design, no stones, just a faint inscription inside. To E. Always. She turned the ring over and over in her palm, as if weighing something. Then, very slowly, she placed the ring on the tabletop, face down, not throwing it away, nor cherishing it. Just a gentle gesture, from someone who had been through enough sadness, enough mistakes, and finally understood that some things need to be returned to time. She didn't cry, not a single tear, but there was something heavy in her breath, in her still posture, in her gaze as calm as undisturbed water. Outside, the afternoon was fading. Sunlight withdrew from the window panes, leaving behind a pale, hazy glow like mist. A few dust motes danced in the light beam, hung suspended, then disappeared. Lisa stood up. She left money beside the unfinished coffee, didn't take the ring. Just picked up her handbag and walked out of the shop, her steps slow but not lost. The glass door closed behind her, a soft ting sounding, as quiet as a wind chime on an afternoon when no one is home. The ring remained there, small, silent, and perhaps much lighter than the last time she took it off. And me, somewhere else in the city, still typing lines of code, headphones on, listening to an instrumental piano piece. I didn't know Lisa had been to that coffee shop today. Didn't know someone had just put a period at the end of a once deep memory. But maybe I didn't need to know, because, on some level, I believe, everyone has to have an afternoon like that, where you sit quietly amidst life, face yourself, and let go of the things you've held onto for too long. And sometimes, the way a person moves forward isn't by running far away, but by sitting still long enough to understand why they needed to leave. I'm standing on a small stage, a dimly lit projection screen behind me, rows of maybe a few dozen seats in front, engineers, students, a couple of young investors, and some people just curious about technology. It's a tech workshop held at a small university down south. Not prestigious, no dazzling stage lights, but somehow, I feel like I belong here. The host introduced me with a brief line. Someone who was silent for 15 years, only for the technology he built to now command the attention of the entire manufacturing industry. I walked up. No presentation slides. No detailed plan on paper. Just a small piece of paper folded in fourths in my jacket pocket, which I ended up not using. I told my story. Didn't start with getting fired, but with the first time I wrote the first line of code for that system, one winter night, around 3 a.m., in a freezing room, next to an instant noodle cup I hadn't eaten before it got cold. I talked about the unknown years, about how silence wasn't weakness, but my way of holding on to self-respect when everything else was falling apart. I didn't mention the old company's name. Didn't say anything about Jude. Not a single complaint. No boasting. Because now, those things didn't matter anymore. I didn't need to answer to anyone. And there was no one left I needed to prove anything to. I just said one final thing before finishing. We often think we need to be brilliant, successful, to have a voice. But sometimes, just not losing yourself in the noise is enough. The room was quiet for a few seconds. Then applause broke out. Not rushed, not fervent. Just a steady, decent, sincere round of clapping. Like the way I had longed to be heard so long ago. Leaving the stage, I stepped outside, stood under the eaves, watching the light drizzle fall. The wind blew through my thin shirt, cold but refreshing. The gray sky wasn't sad, just changing color, transitioning into another season. And I knew I had entered a new place. A place with no more calls needing an answer. No one needing explanations. Nothing left to prove. Just me. Myself. Still living. Still working. And this time, because I chose to.